Who's Dr. Stinky McDougal?
You mean the legend?
He's a real buckaroo bonsai kind of guy.
I watched him dice a guy into pieces with 6 f***ing words on it.
Stinky's the most inconvenient man in most rooms.
He's a master of drunk boxing.
Every time Stinky calls, my blood pressure skyrockets!
I heard he's staging an evolution.
Dr. Stinky McDougal says the difference between a revolution and an evolution is the conscious choice not to break everything in the transition.
And now, broadcasting from the borderless territory of Liberty Valley, Minnesota, here's your host, Dr. Stinky McDougal! Fake it, baby!
Hey everyone, welcome to the Stinky McDougal podcast. This week we have as a guest, Eric Hecker. And if you follow my work, you know that about 6 or 8 months ago, I did a video on Eric's testimony with Dr. Stephen Greer. And that testimony was done in a press conference where he was disclosing different individuals. Eric Hecker's specific disclosure was related to the time that he had spent at the South Pole Station working as a fireman as well as a plumber and I believe an HVAC guy. And what was so interesting about his testimony was not just how it affected the GCP, which to me is an indication that there's veracity behind what he says, but because of my work on the global electric circuit, because of my work on the Venus apocalypse, I was able to actually understand why there might be a directed energy weapon in the South Pole, and that it might actually have something to do with the pyramid Tom DeLonge speaks about in the North Pole, well, actually in Alaska. And so I thought it would be great to get Eric on here, talk a little bit more about what it might mean, what the implications of it might be, how these things might all come together. Because if you've got a directed energy weapon, you're in a planet full of energy. And that means you have to figure out how to get around that directed energy if you're going to fire a weapon. So back to the top of this thing, I'd like to welcome Eric to the podcast here today. Welcome to the Dr. Stinky McDougal podcast. And Eric, let's start out with just a simple question, because I've listened to a number of interviews, but one of the questions people might have about your claims is how much access did you have to these DOMs? And you explain to people what a DOM is. And what have you read that tells you or gave you information about these things?
I guess in regards to access, the only thing I could say is I had 100% access. I mean, it was a very rare position to be in.
So what does 100% access mean? If you were inside of the DOMs, we talk about what a DOM is, and what does it mean that you were inside of it?
Nobody can be inside of one because they're the size of a basketball.
Oh, no. I mean, but aren't there large surface, which you might call a closet that you go into for these things? They can't just be down in the ice. They have to have a surface effect, don't they, that they're in?
Well, they're embedded in the ice.
Oh, so they're directly embedded in the ice.
They are directly embedded in the ice, 5,160 of them. Certainly there's a facility above grade that is receiving the information and processing and transmitting the power out. I mean, it's a standard electronic system.
Right. So when you say that there was an above grade structure, how big was that structure?
2-story building, basically, 1 story off of the ground, elevated, size of a small house.
Was this for each of them, or were they all connected to this single complex?
They were all connected to the one complex. The array itself that's embedded in the ice is 1 kilometer cubed, hence the term Ice-Cube. It's 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer of these DOMs arranged evenly throughout the ice. This is the world's largest phased array transmitter, for lack of a better term.
So what is a phased array transmitter? I don't know that folks are really familiar with that. I know that I know a lot about it, but what would be the basic idea of a phased emitter?
You're going into directions that aren't technically my expertise, but I'll give you my understanding, because I'm sure people are going to jump my crap for not knowing the vernacular.
I don't know all the vernacular either, but I want to get down to it.
A phased array transmitter is basically, just think of it as a very complex antenna that provides directional control of the transmission you're discharging.
Okay. One of the things you talk about is that each of these DOMs has the ability to discharge 2,047 volts.
Transmit would be the term used in the paperwork.
Transmit.
Transmit.
So where's all that voltage at? One of the questions that
What do you mean by at the time that they're writing in the book? It would be located at the DOM and transmitting outwardly.
I mean, 2,000 volts is a lot of power.
Sure is when you times it by 5,160.
What's generating that power?
That seems to be the question at hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Certainly not the power production facility that I observed.
Okay.
But these are all things that I went and testified with in Washington, D.C., June of 2023. I brought this to the attention of the Senate Intelligence Committee and Arrow, and this is currently just the state of disclosure is, who's actually out there with facts and direct firsthand experience that's verifiable, and who's just blowing smoke up the general public's ass. I mean, that's just currently the state of disclosure right now. There's a lot of people that are making a lot of claims. None of them have been there. None of them have done that. None of them got pictures, video, and documentation.
No, fair enough. They don't. But in terms of the documentation, can I ask, where did you see the documentation state the 2,047 volts each?
I guess you would call it the operator's manual for the Ice-Cube Neutrino Detector in possession by the University of Wisconsin-Madison. It's very, very available information.
Okay.
So on my website at deciphering.tv in the archive section, it's called the DOM document. And it states very clearly that each of the DOMs can transmit at up to 2,047 volts. There's 5,160 of them. And this begs a lot of questions that need answering.
So to give people a sense of how much voltage that is in total, how much voltage does the average water heater use?
I have no idea.
Well, I mean,
in regards to trying to get people to comprehend what's going on.
Yeah, like
this is singularly the world's largest phased array transmitter. That the current function for it that is being presented to the world is a lie. The fact that the paperwork that I proved shows that it transmits when they claim that it doesn't means that everybody should be asking, why are they lying to us about the purpose of the world's largest phased array transmitter, and what can these devices do?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Those would probably be the better questions.
Well, and those are great questions. That's why I'm trying to sort of drill into the first question, which is if they're able to transmit, if they're an emitter of some sort, there's got to be a direction that they can emit. Are they emitting up or are they emitting down?
That answer has been answered in regards to can they transmit. That base has already been covered. The documentation has been provided in Washington, D.C. to two different departments. No longer up for debate. The Ice-Cube Neutrino Detector transmits. So with that being said, since it's the world's largest phased array transmitter, as covered in the earlier question, it's directional, and it would be considered omnidirectional, which means it can go into any direction.
Okay, very good, very good. How far is the array from the South Pole Station, or is it surrounded by the South Pole Station?
It pretty much is the South Pole Station as far as the ice embedding goes. It is just, you would say, slightly to the side of the geo pole, 90 degrees south, not the magnetic, but the actual 90 degrees south pole. It's just to the side of it, but again, kilometer by a kilometer by a kilometer. Mm-hmm. Might as well be on top of it.
Right. Did you ever notice any strange auroral? I mean, obviously auroras are common in the South Pole. They're common in the North Pole. Did you ever notice any odd auroral activity over the site? Where you might expect to see long wavy lights. Suddenly there was a vortex, or did you ever see anything strange happen to the auroras, which are of course electric?
Absolutely would be my answer. All the time with great regularity.
Can you describe what some of those look like?
Yeah, for starters, it looked like they were following you. Second to that, it was a lot more about the audio than the visual. The visual is beyond compared to begin with. More than pictures and video will allow the average person to consider what's really going on when you see it with your own eyes. But the more amazing thing to me was the sound. It was like a sizzle, almost like a steak on a cast iron pan, that would occur just before one started, and would kind of give you an idea that one was coming, and somewhat of a direction.
Oh, really?
From which it would be coming from?
A sizzle. That's really interesting, because electrical discharges will sizzle prior to the actual sparking, if you will. And I suppose if you were sitting over a highly charged zone, it would be natural to have an electron discharge that would pop. So that's very interesting. Did you guys track, or did you have any experience where you knew a solar storm was coming in and you happened to, decide everybody, hey, we're going to run out and see the lights? And did you have any? We had
a lot of. There was so many events that we were forewarned about, because they absolutely were paying attention to coronal discharges and things like that would have an impact on us, because we were in a much thinner atmosphere. So besides the wonderful light show that we would get from that knowledge, it was also a lot about our health and safety and how much exposure we were going to be getting to things.
Very interesting. So you said that there was one building in which all the DOMs were attached to. Were you able to go into that building?
Yeah, every day.
Was there any room in there that you were not allowed to go into?
No. I'll reiterate earlier when you asked me what kind of access I had. I'm going to remind you my answer was 100%.
Well, 100%. Okay. So was there any equipment that seemed to indicate that anything other than monitoring equipment was in the South Pole? So if there's anything that this is a directed energy weapon, was there anything that showed you some sort of parlance with another location, or it's just the controls for the neutrino detector, and there might be something in Madison that then receives it, obviously?
I guess we just need to paint a picture of the context that this activity was going on.
Yeah, do that for me.
I was hired by Ratheon. So, I mean, right off the bat, before I ever got there, I figured there was shenanigans afoot.
Fair.
I mean, seriously, every person providing maintenance services, culinary services, and housekeeping services at the South Pole Station, for whatever reason, is a military industrial contractor. I mean, there's plenty of other companies out there that can provide all of those services and don't make weapons systems. So there's a lot more than coincidental activity occurring that should be obvious to the most casual of observers. But it just seems that casual observation is lost in 15-second TikTok clips nowadays.
It's difficult to get people to understand something technical, and it's frustrating when that information is so critical, because people just don't seem to be able to grab it. I like to put it like, it's like there's a veil in front of people, and it's not that they don't have the ability to understand or acknowledge or engage information.
Yeah, it's called fear and cowardice, because if they were to understand, they'd be moved to action. So it's a decision of ignorance as of late, is the way that I'm looking at it. Is that people can choose to take the path of lesser action and therefore delude themselves, but in time, history will show who the brave people were and who the cowards were. It's just the state of the union currently. There's a lot of things that'll be changing very fast. And I can only hope that the rolling out of technology to the average mortgage payer is something that can be described by others, because all I can say is I've observed, that I understand, that I've provided the documentation, the location, the testimony. People need to start doing due diligence. If they want to be spoon-fed everything, they're never going to understand anything. I didn't really put this information out there to be a teacher. It's more like being Paul Revere. I'm just warning people. If you don't understand the dangers that I'm explaining, you have work to do. It just shows how far behind the eight ball you've become in life. I've been to the South Pole Station. There are directed energy weapon systems located there. I've held up my responsibility as a human being. I've reported it to the appropriate authorities with the documentation to prove it. And now I'm just trying to get the rest of the world to understand as quickly as possible that they need to get educated. And, that's really what it boils down to. What are directed energy weapons? What is earthquake inducing? What is stratospheric aerosol injection?
These are all questions that the general population. I ran for office years ago, and they were spraying over our skies here in Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. And I decided, listen, I grew up, I know what planes are. I was a crew chief on B-52s, and I know how you create these contrails across the sky. On B-52s, they used to use demineralized water on takeoff that left long, strenuous contrails. And so when I started seeing them, I knew that we were looking at something that was being aerosoled into the sky. And, at the same time, it also brings in the question of why the South Pole Station is so important. And I think they're all, both the aerosols, the South Pole Station, as well as both of those are tied to whatever is going on in Alaska with this pyramid that people keep talking about. Have you ever heard of the theory of the Black Pyramid in Alaska?
Yeah, absolutely. I've gone up to the location a couple of times, actually, just to investigate whatever I could observe.
Up to the location? Which location?
Mount, as close as you can get to Mount Hayes by road.
Oh, really? Okay. Interesting. Did you see anything? Did it seem that was there any forces there watching you? Anybody tell you to turn back? Any military vehicles?
There was a dude camp. We were in the middle of nowhere when I went, so it was interesting. The one person that we came across, if I remember correctly, he had said he was retired, like Department of Defense or something like that. But it did seem really weird that of all the people that I could meet out in the middle of nowhere, Alaska, this guy's got history with the program.
Right. Yeah. There are no synchronous anyway. So that's interesting. So when you look at the work in the South Pole Station and you consider some of the ideas of what's happening with the pyramid, the idea of suppressing consciousness, is it possible that the South Pole Station may not be designed necessarily to attack a country so much as perhaps attack the pyramid?
That would be your speculation. I don't know what you would be deriving that off of. I mean,
obviously everything is directly aligned with the South Pole Station because of where it's at. Everything is directly north of it. But if we're generating a large amount of energy that can create earthquakes, we have to have a mechanism for how that energy is directed. And that was why I asked whether you had a sense of whether it was directed down into the earth, in which case they could be cue balling it off the core at something, or if it's manifesting up, then it could be part of the ionosphere's electrical circuit, in which case...
How about this? It's absolutely none of that.
Okay.
That would be conventional understanding of working in the Hertzian wavelength. People really need to become extremely versed in Nikola Tesla technology and the efforts of Nikola Tesla. These technologies are not functioning that way in any way, shape, or form. You have to start understanding Tesla's transmission of energy wirelessly. So these would be systems in that regard. So when you talk about transmitting, you're basically talking about delivering energy from the South Pole Station, we'll call it point A, to wherever the hell you want, which is point B. That transfer of power happens from point A to point B, any distance, in no time, with no propagated loss of power. More often than not, there's a gain. This is what Tesla was working with. He used to hate the term when discussing these types of technologies. He didn't like the term radiating of energy to be utilized because it inherently gave the idea of a propagated loss of power, which was the opposite of what he was observing.
I'm familiar with that.
This is what these technologies are doing. They're not doing any of the things people think. They're doing way beyond what you can imagine. These are extremely advanced technologies that they have been rolling ahead of us, probably at least 2 decades for every year that the civilian world has advanced. We have to appreciate that these military industrial complex corporations and worse, these many factions that already have had access to these technologies for many decades, are just simply using them more than they ever had, and we're caught in the crossfire. That's the current state of the union. This is what we, the people of the world, need to be concerned about, is that it's like the term breakaway civilization has been used before. It's like as if there's a whole other society that we're not a part of at all. They have these things. We are not entitled to use them, but we will suffer the effects of them using them against each other, with us caught in the crossfire.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that both Tom DeLonge and Peter Levenda have talked about in their disclosures is the idea that what we're dealing with is a consciousness, if you will, that is interacting with humankind. Do you think that this directed energy weapon might have anything to do with them? Are we sure that that it's designed to work against humans, or is it possible that it could be used for any other purpose? I mean, a weapon's a weapon, and all these crafts that are flying around are electromagnetic as far as we can tell. And if we have a directed energy weapon, it seems electromagnetism would be the first target.
Yeah, I mean, I would just presume that it can do all of those things. When we start to look into the science of what directed energy weapons are, it seems to fit the portfolio that it could operate under. So since they're lying to us about what they said they are doing with it, obviously there's some less than noble people at the helm of this ship. So we have to start considering what are the things that can be done with this device, and would these people engage in those activities? And my concern that I'm trying to let the people know is that currently it seems like these devices are being operated nefariously with bad intentions.
Mm-hmm. One of the things you had mentioned on one of your podcasts was the idea that George W. Bush had given an order to use this weapon on someone else. You said that it was sent to you by a friend. Was this an article that was written, or was this a document that they had come across?
It wasn't George Bush. It was Joe Biden. And
I'm sorry, it was Joe Biden.
It was Turkey. And it was, if I remember correctly, it was a link to a video of him stating in a press conference of some sort.
That's something like that in a press conference is pretty startling that would come out. I'm not, that would be admitting that the whole weapon is there. So if you happen to come across that, please send me the link or the video.
I'm not going to search for it again. People have found it. I've been live on air on the Patrick Bet-David show where his guy couldn't find it, and other people have found it. So this is one of these things. Again, if people want to know, they got to do work. If you want to find the link, folks, go find it. It's out there. If it hasn't, then the internet got scrubbed of it, and that happens too.
Mm-hmm. No, that's true. It definitely does happen that things like that are scrubbed. When you look at the current state of things around the world, you look at the state of the general population's understanding of what's going on. What do you think it might actually look like if people had to be exposed to this next level of technology? What sorts of things are they going to find besides a directed energy weapon? Are there other things going on at the South Pole Station? Or have you found anything else in the Alaskan work that you've done, or with the folks you worked with in New York? I mean, one of the things that I always wonder is when you get access.
I think I found enough information to put on the table for people to engage. I think I found sufficient. It's just a matter of whether people actually want to engage the topic or continually change it.
I think the question, my more specific question is, have other people sent you additional documentation on this? Have you had other people who have sent you materials that seem related from, an outside position?
I don't need any more corroborating evidence for the evidence that I've provided. It stands on on its own.
And I understand that. I'm a believer in you. I'm a believer in your information. I'm just looking to continue to seek if we can add any more pieces to this puzzle that might be helpful for folks that are looking for additional information.
I guess maybe just remind them of how important the information that I have already shared is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's maybe have other people on in the future where you engage the information that I discussed and discuss what the ramifications are for that in society. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's basically all I try to do with these conversations when I get on airs is try to keep it specific to my experience, specific to what I've documented, and pretty much specific to what that means. Oftentimes I get onto these shows and I find that people aren't really actually looking to engage the information or what the ramifications are, which I find wild because
Mm-hmm.
it's what else do you need to hear from me beyond what I've already put out there? I mean, is the fact that we have directed energy weapon systems all over this planet, and I found the biggest one and proved that they're lying about it. Is that, I mean, what do you think of that?
Well, I think that much like what we would call the hidden technology of the UFO phenomenon, we have several whistleblowers who have stated that we have recovered craft, we have exotic technology we've been studying, then they put it all under the purview of national security. It's one of these things you don't want to tell people what you have in terms of your weapons. You don't want to let them know what you have in terms of your technology. One of the crazy things I heard years ago was the reason that Iran stopped their uranium enrichment program was because their team of remote viewers were able to remote perturbate switches and to screw up their uranium enrichment program. And so you're not going to tell people that you have, remote viewers who can also do remote perturbation. That's just a technology you don't want your enemies knowing about. And so there's a certain degree of warcraft here that
tons. Yeah, the disclosure community is ripe with it because probably 99% of the podcasters are probably some sort of a Fed.
I don't know if it's quite that high, but I would agree with the statement that most podcasters are not quite as articulate on the subject as we might need at this time and place. And I say that from the standpoint that if you listen to a lot of these guys, they're still talking about how we're being visited by extraterrestrials from some other place in the universe. And the evidence just doesn't support that. What it supports is that we're seeing is an interdimensional event. And so in that type of a scenario, the technologies would be, as you've mentioned, so far ahead that they would be difficult to even introduce to the population, much less, what would happen if you let that kind of technology become known.
Right, but the facts of the matter still being in the regard that I'm presenting is every single bit of it's still man-made. It's not intergalactic. It's not interdimensional.
Correct.
I'm not sitting here trying to say that those things are impossible. They're just off of the information that we have available at our fingertips today. They're just highly improbable. The probability is that probably 99% of the activities that we're seeing in the skies for many decades are man-made craft from technologies that we're just not privy to that are being monopolized.
Yeah, that's one of the things about the
because there's so much of that activity going on and disinformation being required to be peppered throughout the communities. I'm going to double down back on my experience when it comes to the disclosure community and trying to get this information out, of which I've gone to Washington, D.C. and testified because I'm not playing around. I am thinking very lowly of the disclosure community lately, especially when it comes to podcasters and such, because it's really starting to seem like the vast majority of them are just feds. I mean, you don't have to be a troll behind a screen where no one sees you. People control the world in real life, and they're called podcasters. And in certain communities, the amount of COINTELPRO agents is off the wall, and disclosure is one of them.
Yeah, nobody. I don't think anybody who pays attention will disagree with the old adage that you should own your enemy. So if you don't, if you want to control a narrative, you have to put your people, which is what we know they did with Operation Mockingbird and several other programs within our media. So there's
COINTELPRO specifically.
Yeah. So there's no reason to not think that they're in the podcast space as well. The question is just, where, who, and what are they propagating in terms of
And
a
why
message.
am I the only one that seems to want to engage that conversation? Isn't that funny? I mean,
Well,
am I the
listen,
first one to think of this? I mean, there's
uh,
a lot of podcasters out there. How come there's not a lot of podcasts on? Who's the top 3 podcasters you think are full of crap feds?
oh, me personally,
I think, well, absolutely. But these are conversations that I would suggest by not having them is a detriment to the truth community. Instead of everybody picking their 3 favorite people that they believe any goddamn thing that comes out of their mouth because it's their 3 favorite people.
Right.
Everybody will talk about that all day long. That is not verboten. But if you try to discuss who you think is full of crap in the community, then everybody comes at you. It's the weirdest thing. It's almost like they're all in it together to make sure that nobody is allowed to be spoken ill of. It shows collusion.
It might show the fractured nature of the disclosure movement, if you will. The idea being that we know from the testimony of people like Richard Doty that they've infiltrated all sorts of the UFO groups, that they've had a long-term disinformation
Richard Doty has
program.
blood on his hands from his infiltration.
Yeah, it could very well could be, and these are all part of the background that the average 96% of America, 98% of the world doesn't really have a grasp on, what has been happening. And now we're coming up to the point in history, it seems, where they're going to have to acknowledge more and more that that these things have occurred because they're being exposed. And I'm with you that there are certain agencies out there with presences, whether it's formal or influential is a secondary question to it.
Formal and influential. They're running the alien conventions. They are the vast majority of content creators on the internet at this point. I mean, let's not be naive. I mean, if they could afford to have infiltrated all of the news mass media for the last few decades at that great expense, now that they no longer have use for the mass media and no longer have to put that much money in that direction to wield power over it, what do you think they're doing with that massive budget? You think they're not afford like whole office buildings full of content creators?
Across different countries at that. I don't think this is just an American thing. And they
precisely. So so that just makes the problem even more exponentially serious. If the vast majority of content creators are just office buildings in the US full of our own different departments, whether it's the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, the DIA, every one of these departments has a financial motive to invest in content creators.
Mm-hmm.
So now that we know all of our guys are doing it, and you brought up that all of their guys are also doing it, I'm not going to argue this at all. I'm just going to say these are the conversations we need to have fast and furiously, because now what percentage are we talking about already right now? How many desks of content creators does each department have for all of these factions mentioned? Is it hundreds? Could it be thousands? Would that be beyond their budget? Would it be impossible to consider that, I don't know, maybe the largest UFO conventions, the top 3 every year in the US, is it possible that it might be worth their investment to produce those? To control the narrative yet again? I mean, they seem to be very lucrative live events. We always hear that the CIA has these cutouts and these front companies and all these things to, get black ops budget money. So cash cows like, a UFO convention where, you get thousands of people to come in and spend thousands of dollars in a weekend. Seems to be an interesting, business model. And I just find it very hard to believe that these agencies would never have thought of this until I said it. So I feel like if I thought of it, they must have thought of it first. And I mean, if I wanted to control the narrative on the conversation and had a lot of skin in the game when it came to the secrecy of the topic, just seems to me to be a really sound investment that would bear a lot of fruit in returns.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You've been to a number of these. Have you been to, let me start over. Have you been to these UFO conferences or similar conferences? And if
Absolutely.
so, how have you been received? And how do you feel about the other speakers that were there? Do you feel that they were there to muddy water in the general conversation, and that included to muddy whatever you might say? Or did you feel that some of the conferences held their own water well and gave you a fair shake?
I've attended as a speaker. I've hosted my own events. I've attended just as a participant. I've kind of run the gamut when it's come to these conventions. What I find is that the people themselves, the people looking for the truth, receive me very well. The speakers that I have contrary information to loathe me because I'm happy to call them out on their shenanigans. The hosts want nothing to do with me. The event producers, I guess you would say, is basically because the most part I will attack the lies of the people that they put at the podium. So I went, the first event I ever spoke at was in Las Vegas. The producer of the event, a gentleman by the name of Saeed David Farman, runs a production company called 5D Events. First time I ever spoke publicly, it went fantastic. Met a lot of nice folks, but then immediately after the event, I was contacted by one of his lead producers, a gentleman that goes by the name of Eric the Healer Datamer. And Eric and I had a phone call conversation where he informed me that I was going to have to figure out a way to take my information, my experience, and weave the story in a way so that it supports the flat earth theory. And I basically just told him to go F himself. And he told me that if I didn't do what he said, then I would no longer be allowed to speak at any of their events.
Okay, very good. That's sorry, I had a little background noise that I had to.
No worries.
No,
It's all good.
It's an active lab here. I say once in a while. These are all very interesting points that you make, and when we talk about weaving the story about the directed energy weapon and the work down in the South Pole, were there other people there that you shared this with at the time that you said, hey, there's something going on, what do you think about this? I mean, while you were there, you discovered it. I can't imagine you didn't discuss it with anyone.
I didn't discover it while I was there. I figured it out after years of research and talking to more people, including former crew members, about the times that we were there.
Oh, okay. Okay. So then you were reviewing the idea, you were reviewing the information, you looked back on it. If you didn't come to the general realization while you were there, you were doing your research. Was there a moment where this all kind of culminated and you went, holy crap, this thing must be?
Yeah, when I read the operator's manual that stated with great clarity that it transmits at up to 2,047 volts each per 5,160, what's being called the detector, DOM. So yeah, that was my moment of reckoning where I was like, aha, they're lying. Right.
All right. Very interesting. Very interesting. Now, one of the other things that you've discussed in some of your videos, and let me know if I have the information correct. You actually talk about having been a part of MK Ultra. Did I understand that correctly?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there was any reason for your selection for the South Pole Station that may correlate with the fact that, or the idea, or the premise that you participated in something when you were a youth?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know how anybody could make a separation on it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's got to have something to do with it.
Well, that's just sorry, I got my kitten here. She's trying to crawl on the thing. That was one sort of the questions that I started with when I was looking at this. And I went, that's an interesting piece of this, because it takes your story and it makes it, instead of I was at the South Pole Station and now I have a story to tell arc, it kind of takes your arc from a much younger age. Can you give me a little sense of one, when this might have occurred, and two, what sort of activities or things do you recall occurring?
I mean, just to be simple, quick, and blunt, because I feel like we're yet again getting off of the ramifications of what directed energy weapons systems are and what's going on this planet. But since we're going to make it about me, I was ruthlessly abused as a kid, up into and including sexual abuse and MK Ultra type stuff. And what else would you like to know?
Well, you know what I'm getting at to a degree here, Eric, is that in my research that I kind of put together as big a picture as I can.
Mm-hmm.
There seems to be a long, what's the best way to put this? There seems to be a long arc, if you will, that for many reasons we can say begins in 1947. And the people whom that arc involves doesn't seem to start at this seminal point of you being in the Antarctic, in the South Pole. For me, what I've continued to see from individual to individual to individual is that their interaction with the phenomenon starts at a very young age, and it starts oftentimes in very mysterious ways. It may be in some ways the question: were you selected long before you knew it? Were there reasons in the future that affected the past? It's a question of retrocausality. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. The simple answer to all of these things is yes.
Mm-hmm. So if that's a simple answer, can you give me a sense then of how you felt as you began to explore this greater? I mean, do you feel like there's a mission here to tell people about this?
I feel like there's kind of a mission to get everybody aware that there's directed energy weapons systems on the planet and to discuss the ramifications of what those are. I feel way less significant in the conversation, and historically, from engagements that I've had before, it usually seems that when people want to make the conversation about the messenger, in this case me, versus the message, it usually has more to do with like some sort of character assassination in regards to kind of discounting the messenger and then therefore discounting the message. So most people hear MK Ultra, they're going to hear this guy's a lunatic. I mean, I've been down this road a lot of times before.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that's interesting when I do this, Eric, if you look back over here to this black, I told you right now, it's flashing me X's. We're getting what's known as a local network coherence event. And I think what when I look at these things, what it says to me is that what we're doing here isn't character assassination. That's not what I'm doing, because that's not how I view the entire picture. I view that there are forces at work beyond humanity that are creating experiences for individuals that align them in positions and places long before they realize it's occurring. I just wanted to establish for a moment that these types of things are present within your personal experience. When we look at the damage and the dangers of what they did with MK Ultra, what we really don't know is what they really learned about the whole picture. And so, when you find someone who has such an incredible experience, right? I mean, these are not small experiences to participate in. That if you find yourself part of a larger project and much later in life, the question is, are these linked? And if so, how or why? And what sort of things might we learn from or glean from someone who begins with a magnanimous beginning and then later gets to expose this large event? Do you see what I mean?
I do see what you mean, but to me, from my perspective, it sounds like a big waste of time and energy. It's like, in a way, it's like I walked up to you and I was like, hey, did you know there's a gun pointed at your face and someone's about to pull the trigger? And you're like, well, tell me more about yourself. I mean, that's what this feels like to me.
Well, no, I mean, look, my purpose, again, I believe you. I'm 110% on your side.
Then we should probably just engage that as a dialogue.
Yep.
Like, what are the ramifications of the fact that you believe what I've presented to the world? What I should say, what I've documented to the world. These aren't claims anymore, right? I get people say, Hecker claims this. No, Hecker proved this. right? So this is where we should be at. Is that I find that most of these conversations are very taxing for me to engage because they don't accomplish the mission of what I'm up to. Like every time I get on air, I'm not really looking to say the same thing that I've been saying for 4 years. Hi, my name's Eric Hecker. I've been to the South Pole Station. The aurora is really pretty. You know what? None of that actually really matters.
Well, they're evidence. They're evidence so that we can
which has already been proven, and that could be covered in an intro. Hi, folks. This is Eric J. Hecker. This guy's been speaking for years about what he has proven has been going on at the South Pole Station. He has testified at the Senate Intelligence Committee in Arrow in Washington, D.C., provided the documentation. Let's engage the information that Eric has presented to the world and what the ramifications are now that we know this is the current state of reality.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we are, we're working into the ramifications. Again, I think the ramifications in particular for you just stretch many, many, many decades. And I just wanted to establish that. And I think it's important to establish, and it sort of goes back to the old Gnostic idea, right? There are individuals who have secret personal knowledge, and there are individuals who have secret universal knowledge. And I think you fall into the category of those individuals. It's a small category of individuals who have had experiences over their life which lead them to be part of this disclosure process. And so the ramifications.
That I can't argue.
Well, yeah. Well, Eric, and that's what I mean when I talk about ramifications. What are the ramifications? The ramifications are someone with a significant history of abuse from the U.S. government has now taken a position to expose the U.S. government. And I want to make sure that people understand the complexity of that occurring over a long time span, but not only the complexity of making that happen over a long time span, but the fact that in a lot of ways, Eric, this isn't just a single event that you're going through and then you decided to expose. This is actually a lifelong experience towards a single event, which I might call a disclosure of the directed energy weapon itself. I don't know if you know this, but years ago, when Steve Bassett held the citizen hearing on disclosure, one of the questions came from the senator, actually, former senator from Alaska, Mike Gravel. And Mike Gravel asked him, what might cause an uncontrolled disclosure? And he said, a natural disaster, right? And a natural disaster, look, you talk about this being an earthquake generator, if that is indeed what it is. I don't know that is. I mean, I agree with you that it created the earthquake in Christchurch. I delineate in my video why I believe you are correct, and it's because they are engaging the delta Y that surrounds the Pacific Ocean. And if that's true, and that's what they're doing, then it would have hit those two specific points on the south, one being the Macquarie Triple Junction, the other being the Sandwich Islands. And those two sides are just the parts of the circuit. And if we're talking about an electrical discharging machine, we need to decide how we define where this thing impacts us. I think that's probably the best way that I would look at it. And so it was part of why I wanted to ask the question.
Sounds like your only hang up is it sounds to me like you're of the opinion that an earthquake is simply just unintended side effect.
The earthquake in Christchurch was an unintended side effect of putting the machine online. I agree with you that.
Well, that's not you're. But it sounds to me there's we're not agreeing here. There's a discrepancy.
Okay.
It sounds to me like you're saying that earthquakes generated by the Ice-Cube Neutrino Detector are simply unintended side effects from some other primary activity. That's what it sounds like you're saying to me.
Oh, no, I'm saying just the Christchurch event itself.
That was simply a misfire by direction, but an intended application for the device.
Why would we attack New Zealand, though?
It's a misfire. It's a misfire. They hit the wrong target, but again, they were utilizing it for something it was intended to do at the time. It's like having a brand new gun. You aim at the bullseye downrange. The first time you pull the trigger, it may not hit the bullseye. You hit something else you did not intend to, so you make a correction and fire again. And as my testimony previously stated, they twice hit Christchurch by accident before there was a correction made.
So, the next question then, I think, is, how could we identify any other locations where the machine may have been used? I mean, there's a lot of earthquakes that occur over,
We
time
can
and
start
space.
listening to a gentleman on YouTube that goes by the name of Dutch Since, who seems to be very good at tracking the energy blasts coming out of the South Pole Station, where they move all around the world. And he's pretty damn good at letting people know when earthquakes are going to hit before they hit. So there are people that are researching this stuff and are doing due diligence and can pretty much substantiate everything that I'm saying. But it doesn't change the fact that if the general population of the planet doesn't start all paying attention to what's going on with the information I presented and start engaging it, and if we're not going to engage it here, maybe people that are listening to this will just decide to strike up a conversation with anyone they meet, anywhere they're at. Be bold, have conversations. Hey, have you heard that there's directed energy weapons at the South Pole Station? They generate earthquakes. Yeah, there's this guy that went and proved it, and now nobody seems to want to talk about it, but they care about what he did in grammar school.
Well, yeah, there's different ways that we can position this more broadly. And I think one of the questions might be that people ask, and why they have issues with this, is the idea that when you create an earthquake, you're really, in a very large percentage of these situations, targeting the general population of the country or the region. And this also presupposes that there's a fault line within these areas that can be accessed, that can be targeted. If
that
you
would be a poor presumption.
Well, if you're going to create an earthquake, you have to have a fault line, don't you?
No, you don't. Says who?
Well, earthquakes mostly.
If you're going to wait for a natural earthquake, I can appreciate observing fault lines. Might assist you in that endeavor. But when you're talking about earthquake inducement, which is simply delivering all of the energy needed to have an earthquake to the place where you want to have an earthquake, you get an earthquake. It's pretty much that simple.
Well, I understand.
A delivery. What's a missile? It's an energy delivery device. We send a whole bunch of energy to an area that doesn't want the energy, right? And we have a missile that has the capacity to deliver the energy, and then we have the actual warhead, which is the energy to be delivered. So let's just take that very conventional understanding of weapons grade energy delivery, and now let's teach everybody about the current state of weapons. We have what are called directed energy weapons, which, as I stated earlier, take the energy from point A and deliver it to point B, covering any distance in no time. So the Ice-Cube Neutrino Detector in transmit mode would be analogous to the missile traversing that space in time. We've negated that. We could simply now deliver the energy from point A to point B in no time over any distance. Ta-da! Earthquake. This is really simple stuff, and people don't have to understand it to appreciate the reality of it, just like when Nikola Tesla first came out and gave the world alternating current electricity. Did everybody all of a sudden have an understanding of what electricity was, or did it take many years of them becoming saturated in this new information before they can even begin to wrap their heads around something they were using every single day?
Mm-hmm.
So we're just currently at that new paradigm where the technology is going to exceed people's understanding and appreciation for a long time after it's already in their hands. And if they can't figure it out when it's in their hands, far be it from me to, have to bear the brunt of expressing it to them right now when there's not even a common vernacular.
Yeah, no, the general population does not understand the technical idea of a directed energy weapon,
It removes the missile, but the energy gets there. I mean, that's about as simple as that's it. That's it in a nutshell. It's not more complex than that. And if people can't wrap their heads around that to engage this conversation, then the fault lies on their inability to consider ideas that they do not currently support, which Mark Twain stated was the sign of higher intellect. To be able to consider an idea that you don't necessarily support yet, this is where we're at today. You don't have to understand directed energy weapons, just like you don't have to understand how a plane works. But you can't sit there and say that because, oh, you can't tell me from nose to tip how to build a plane, therefore I don't need to be concerned about it. Oh, no, you still need to be concerned. It's still a reality that we deal with every day. Powered flight. Well, now we have flightless energy delivery. It's not that hard of a concept. People need to start engaging it.
Well, I appreciate that there are technologies that people, perhaps aren't ready to engage and understand. In part, I've always found this interesting. One of the subjects that I follow closely is the concept of an electric universe, the idea that everything around us is electricity. Everything is just energy and a transference of energy in itself. And, it startled me as I started to get into this, stunned actually, as I was getting into this and researching. And I suddenly realized the one thing that they don't teach in school is the electric field, right? Kids graduate and they have almost no experience in how electricity works. That's a near global phenomenon. And so understanding a weapon that operates off of 5,000 DOMs that have 2,047 volts each, people don't understand what voltage is, much less what a directed energy weapon might be, right? So we have this gap in our education, and one might even argue that the gap is on purpose, right? You get all these kids to study and spend all this time on trigonometry and geometry and all of this nonsense. They're never going to use. A very small portion will ever need geometry in their life, but electricity surrounds us everywhere. And nobody has any use and has no idea on how electricity works. So I'm a big believer that you're on the right path on that question. I just, the question is how we define that it was a misdirection of an aimed shot at Christ Church. We don't have, we don't know who's aiming. We don't know what the aiming mechanism is. So I don't know how we can say that it was an actual discharge of the weapon so much as it could have been the weapon coming online. We know that there was an earthquake, and I think that it correlates, since you can actually correlate the time it went on with the earthquake in Christ Church. I think that's phenomenal. I agree.
It sounds like to me you're just simply ignoring the testimony that I've previously given.
Well, if you can tell me how they line it up, if you can tell me who's pointing the gun or what they're using, none of
that is required.
Well, it is if you're going to claim that Christ Church was hit by a directed energy weapon by accident. You have to, if it's by accident, then you have to say, Bob, what they were trying to do with the algorithm is the algorithm would have done X, Y, Z, and instead it went Z, Y, X.
That's I couldn't beg to differ greater. That would be your opinion of how this should be confirmed.
Well, I'm not saying how it should be confirmed.
Your level of satisfaction. It sounds like, it just sounds like you're not content with the direct firsthand experiences of people that were there and engaged with the crew and provided the testimony.
Well, but you said it was a fired weapon. And since you weren't there when the person who fired the weapon pushed it, right? You weren't there when they targeted it. I don't know how we can say that it was a targeted event that failed and hit the wrong location. I think we can say that it was an event.
How can you find that hard to say? How can you find that very hard to say?
Well, you're suggesting that the intent of the individuals behind the program.
Yes, I am. I spoke with them. I mean, I've communicated
you've spoken with someone
before.
who told you that there was a directed energy weapon, that told you this was a directed energy weapon, who knows that it's a directed energy weapon. And although they may not have shared it with you, maybe they did. You're telling me
that wasn't the conversation.
Okay.
There was note that you just went from discussing the misfire to an explanation of the device. So you're making leaps that I don't understand. It sounds like you're
it
sounds to me like you're just attempting to discount what I'm saying or change the topic a lot. But regardless, I spent time at the South Pole Station alongside the crew of, like, I shouldn't say so, I was part of the crew that was responsible for the misfiring of an earthquake generating device. I have come forwards to take the brunt of this. I am not here to out anyone else. I spoke to many people about many things, of which that was one of them.
So someone
Do
told
you find
this
that
was a
hard?
fire.
Are you having trouble with the testimony that I gave?
No, I'm trying to drill down because it's one of the questions that I have.
It sounds like what you're
on whether
trying
or
to
not-
do is discount. I've
No,
been down this
no,
road. It sounds. Let's say I can't discuss any of my sources, right?
Mhm.
So obviously, I have spoken to people about stuff because I was someone privy enough to be there. Do you find that to be insufficient experiential events?
Well, one of the things that I hadn't heard in a previous interview was the idea that you had spoken with someone who told you that this was a directed energy weapon. And so
I just told you in this interview that the documentation proves that.
well, the documentation says
the documentation proves that it transmits. There you go. So it's a directed energy weapons platform on paper.
I agree
So
with
regardless
all of
of
those statements.
There you go. So there's a fact that goes against what you just queried about.
No, my only statement was whether or not we can ascribe what happened in Christ Church as the firing of a directed energy weapon or the coming on of an energy weapon.
Yes, we apparently we the people at South Pole Station can, and you'll be in the group of people that will fail to take the warning.
Okay. I'm again, Eric, I believe you. I'm on your side.
It doesn't sound like
I only have a question. My only question.
It doesn't sound like it.
My big question is how we know and can define that what happened at Christ.
Because I told you. Because I told you.
Okay.
Because someone who was there. Because someone. Yeah. Well, that's. It's called Dasein. If you read Heidegger's Dasein, and Heidegger's book Being in Time uses the term to explain the knowledge gained from firsthand experiences. And he stated in this book that there will be a time in the not too distant future where people will mistakenly look at academics and educated people, certified, degreed people, and they will take those people's word over people with Dasein, people who have the actual experience in the topic, not just book read. So I feel like this is one of those circumstances. You're not going to appreciate direct firsthand experience as well as you should right now. That's okay. That happens. You want more. I spoke with Linda Moulton Howe. I gave her all of the information about what was going on down in Antarctica, and she got very condescending and didn't really want to talk to me unless I could tell her what physicists that I spoke with down there would be willing to back up what I said. No backup required. My information, again, stands on its own. So this is what people do. This is someone who's a well-known researcher and works very hard to attempt to try to discount my truth that's coming out, because best I can tell, the vast majority of podcasters are feds that are doing due diligence to put my information to the back burner while taking shite and putting a spotlight on it.
No, I mean, actually, you've been on 3 or 4 of the largest podcasts out there. So, you've had good exposure. I've caught your podcasts on several people on the Bet. You were on the Bet David podcast. He has millions of subscribers. You have,
and all he did was try to throw me under the bus and discount me the entire time.
Well, actually, when you listen to him, he says, Eric, I can't say that I can put my finger on anything that he endorsed that he thinks you're telling the truth. You didn't want anything from him. I have the same opinion of you.
And then he attempted for the entire episode, before, during, and after, did everything in his power to operate from a position that was not supportive of the information. I mean, it's very simple from my perspective. Every single person I engage, I can tell whether they actually appreciate and support my information by off of their actions. And then I can tell the people that don't. off of their actions. And it's the same activity for both parties every time. And I'm just going to be completely frank. You're not doing any of the things for the people that are normally on the side of people that support what I'm up to.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, there's a lot of ideas out there.
Your line of questioning comes from the other end of the pendulum swing, so to say. Well, you haven't really engaged any of the verifiable, actionable intelligence that I presented in the conversation today. You just asked a different question. You didn't really engage it.
Well, exactly which actionable intelligence have I missed?
What do you think about the fact that human beings can generate earthquakes now? Well, what do you think we should do about that? What do you think we, the people, should do now that that known information is available?
Well, I agree.
Consider it, even though you don't necessarily support it, because you have a lot of doubts about how this information came and what needs to be proved to everybody. Blah blah blah.
I don't have any doubts. Once again, okay, I don't have any doubts that what you've identified is a directed energy weapon in South America and in Antarctica. I have said that several times. I have endorsed it. I have told you that I believe the GCP points to the veracity of your claim. My point that I'm making, that I'm trying to get to the heart of, and I'm just looking for information from my listeners and all listeners. I've listened to several interviews. There were questions that continue to come up where I went, boy, it'd be great if I could know more about this so that I have better information to continue to understand how it works. And it's part of just a conversation around how the DOMs operate and what they might be doing at any given time. And so when we make claims
transmitting
about transmission, I don't think it's an unreasonable line of questioning to get your thoughts on how that might occur. I don't think that anybody in a proper interview situation would consider that an out of bounds question, because once we understand how it's transmitted, then we can start talking about who might be at the most risk for this weapon being used. I think that would be a reasonable thing for people to want to know if we're going to talk about the implications.
You are presupposing a lot. So First and foremost, everyone's at threat right now. From technologies they can't even begin to wrap their head around, nor can I begin to express to them the complexity of the problem. Now what? So we just leaped through all of the progression. We just passed all of the questions that you just had. It's the most dangerous thing on the planet that no one knows about. And everybody's under threat. Everybody.
I tend to disagree that everybody is under threat, but it just, it has to do with
based on what do you know in this regard, sir? I'm coming from someone with direct firsthand experience and documentation of what this thing can do, which is negatively impact every single person on the planet. That is the extent for which it can reach.
I agree with that. So it can. But that would be a view of a fatalist, that everyone is at the target sites, and
this is a gun. This is not fatalist. This is not fatalist in the slightest. This is just letting everybody know the current state of the union. There's a gun on the planet that can hit everyone.
Yes, I don't have a problem with that statement.
There you go. That's all I'm getting at, is that's so. So therefore, I just let the whole world know that everyone's in greater danger from the information that I presented now that they're aware of it. What are they going to do about it? These are the things that should be getting discussed. These are the considerations that should be had, is that now all of a sudden there's a new weapon that can touch you that couldn't touch you before.
I am in your camp, in that there is a weapon and that weapon has perhaps a global reach. I don't have any reason to argue with that. The only point I think that we are perhaps at a crossroads with is exactly what population is at risk, or who it is exactly that the weapon may be designed for, right? And so, it's my research says this has as much to do with the pyramid in Alaska as it does anything else, because it's so.
I'd like to see your research that says that the South Pole Ice-Cube Neutrino Detector has some pertinence in regards to the pyramid underneath Mount Hayes.
Well, in my video on the directed energy weapon, I show that the junctions of the Delta Y make up the Sandwich Islands on the east and the Macquarie Triple Junction on the west, and that as the Macquarie Triple Junction electrical function exits the crust of the Earth, it actually does a wave and comes out at Christ Church where the plates meet. And that would explain if the machine went on in South America, it would initiate these two nodes as part of the delta Y. And if it did, this one on, for example, Rapa Nui, which is part of the delta Y on the inner path, that's the big crater on the island. That's the island corner that took the most energy during the Venus apocalypse. It is cognate with the Macquarie Triple Junction that ties into Christ Church. And so my research on the electrical functions of the global electric circuit tell me that the South Pole Station is directly aligned to the delta Y of the Pacific Ocean, and that the pyramid in Alaska is not just sort of in the right location for the ground, it is in the perfect location. If you were to stick, and I did in my video, if you were to stick the diagram of a delta Y over the entire Alaska formation, the pyramid is said to be exactly where that grounding point is. If it's a grounding, if the South Pole Station is grounded in the South Pole and you discharged up, you would reverse that grounding and it would unground the thing on the other end. That's just electrical science. That would just overload it and discharge it. I don't know that that's what it's for. But I do
back
know
to
that
what I
that's
was
an electrical
stating earlier.
circuit.
It's not an electrical circuit by the understanding that you are presenting. For starters, A, it's not grounded. So that takes that theory right out of your theory. It's not grounded. So next thing.
The DOMs aren't grounded?
Correct.
Sure. You can't have 2,047 volts unless you have a ground.
Really? How do ships do it, sir?
They're not.
There's a lot of ways to do this.
They're not.
There's a lot of different ways to do this.
Well, but it also then
it's not grounded.
Presupposes the question.
You can have an electrical system that's free floating system that's not grounded. So for starters, since we're being specific with semantics and questions, right? You said because it's grounded in this and that. Well, it's not grounded.
Okay.
Okay.
If it's not grounded, then it's not going through the ground.
Right. I never said it was going through the ground.
Well, that was the question. That's one of the questions.
This is what I stated earlier about trying to ascribe that there are different things going on that have nothing to do with your current level of understanding of electromagnetic stuff. Like I said earlier, it goes from point A to point B in no time. This is completely outside of your understanding. You have a lot to learn about Nikola Tesla. You have a lot to learn about scalar waves, longitudinal waves, non-Hertzian waves. This is going to take a lot of work on your part. So now consider that energy is going from point A to point B, whatever distance, in no time. Rewrite all of your physics with that understanding. Oh, and it shows up with more energy. Okay, so this pretty much just defied all the laws of physics that you currently know, but it's an activity that's going on.
Again,
in the appendices of one of Nikola Tesla's books, he does one of the greatest dissertations on completely undermining the fourth law of thermodynamics. I mean, everybody's sitting here talking to me saying, well, can you explain how this machine works? Well, for starters, no, because it doesn't work like anything that you've ever known existed. And we don't have a vocabulary for it. You're going to try to make me use vocabulary for a system that it's not, in the loosest sense of the term. It's a directed energy weapon, which we hear the word energy, we think electricity. But let's just jump right to, it's not like any of the stuff you're familiar with.
Okay. I'm just trying to uncover. If I'm not familiar with it, then let's explain how it works so that I can be familiar.
Well, how about we do a lot less uncovering, because I uncovered this years ago. How about we do a lot more dialoguing about the ramifications, sir?
Well, the ramifications are, as I've said earlier, are based on the question, how does it operate, so that we know what they're utilizing?
No, the ramifications are based on the ramifications are based on your ability to consider an idea before you support it.
No, I do appreciate that, and I appreciate the idea and the ramifications of a directed energy weapon, and that it has the ability to generate earthquakes. I'm on board. I believe that it has the opportunity.
You just want to engage. You just want to engage the ramification side of the conversation. Perchance people start to considering it, is what it seems like to me. You don't want people to consider what I'm saying by first and foremost not considering it.
No, I've considered it. I've asked several questions about how exactly a weapon like this might operate.
You seem to like literally be refusing to engage a dialogue about the ramifications and having consideration for the topic, and it just seems curious to me.
Well, when you look at what you're describing, which I think it's, if we want to talk about ramifications, right? So let's say that a country discovers that we have this weapon. Let's say it's Russia, right? Would it not seem to you that the South Pole Station would be exceptionally vulnerable to a counterstrike? Did you notice? Was there any defensive weaponry in the South Pole at all, or is it completely unprotected?
It has, to the best of my knowledge, 3 directed energy weapon systems, which puts it in an arena of battle that I guess you're not familiar with.
These are all the questions that we're working towards. And so,
it just seems to me again to it
how
just
might
seems to me
the
to be
directed energy weapon provide
changing the subject
over the South Pole?
Say that again, sir?
How might a directed energy weapon provide protection over the South Pole? Is this a laser?
I never said that it would.
Is it a pulse weapon? Well, you said there. I said how. I asked, are there defensive? Because if this is a weapon and this is a highly in tune weapon, are there defense systems? Did you see any sign of a defense system? Any military personnel?
I guess
any changes?
In and of itself, it would be its own defense also.
That sounds like a question.
But it seems to me that you have a lot less of an understanding of the information I presented than you presented. And it seems like you're not able to connect any of the dots or use any ability to extrapolate or infer from the information that I said. So it's like pulling teeth, and it seems like a constant distraction from the information that I already proved. I mean, it's like you're trying to prove that a directed energy weapons system exists at the South Pole Station, because it doesn't seem like you're content with that yet.
No,
you're asking a series of questions. It doesn't sound like it at all because of your line of questioning. It seems like you're speaking with a forked tongue.
I don't know how you get a forked tongue when I've said
because you say one thing and do another. Well, let's get back to engaging the ramifications of the fact that directed energy weapon systems exist on the planet, because you seem to want to keep avoiding engaging that reality. Inability to consider a topic you don't yet support, I guess, would be a sign of a lesser intellect.
Well, I mean, one of the things I'm really trying to engage here, Eric, is not whether or not I have a greater or a lesser intellect with you, but whether or not we can continue to elevate the conversation around this discovery of yours.
It doesn't seem that way, because it seems like you keep bringing it down.
And whether we can continue to add details into this. I understand that you have.
I'm not here to add details, sir. I'm here to engage.
I'm here to add details. I have.
I'm not really.
The podcast is in order to bring more details forward.
No, not necessarily. It's to engage the topic at hand
and bring more information to the people. That you've done 50 interviews, Eric. I've listened to a number of them. These are the additional questions that I have. That individuals.
You're asking the same questions that everybody's asked.
So I've listened to a lot of them. I haven't heard a single person ask you to tell me how they direct the weapon. I haven't heard a single person ask you how it is exactly they targeted accidentally Christ Church. I haven't heard a single person ask you, how are these DOMs transmitting and in what direction?
Then you haven't watched enough interviews. I've been asked this a multitude of times.
Okay, well, why are these difficult questions to answer? I ask how,
because it would be like if I went on an airplane and no one else had ever been on an airplane before, and I simply went for a flight, and then I got off that plane and I was like, hey, there's this thing called an airplane, and if everybody said, tell me immediately how it works or you're full of shit, doesn't make them right.
No, No, I
Right.
concur with that.
So that's what's going on right now. Because I've seen this a bunch of times, sir.
Mm-hmm.
By all means, continue.
What I'm driving at, I think, Eric, and where I think what drives most people's questioning around what's happening is they want to know more information about how should I be worried about this? Am I at risk? Can they target the middle of the US? Can they target New York? Can they target San Pablo? Can they target St. Petersburg? And so the answer is, according to you, which I tend to agree with, is potentially yes. The question is, how do they do that? And how do we effectuate an understanding around how the machine is used?
This is such a horrible direction to go. I couldn't disagree more. Again, this goes right back to the analogy before. I just walked up to you and I said, "Oh my God, look, there's a robber and he has this brand new kind of gun. And he's got it to your face and he's going to pull the trigger and you're going to turn to me like, well, Eric, I'm not really going to feel threatened unless you can explain to me every step of what when this guy pulls the trigger on this new kind of gun, how exactly does that make the bullet eject out of the casing, down the barrel, and blow my face apart?"
Well,
you're asking about the gun right now. You want to know the details on the gun when someone's got a gun to your face.
It's not the details.
It's laughable to me. It's laughable to me.
It's the claim, Eric, that they can use this on anyone, and that people would have a right to have.
It's not a claim. It's been proven. It's been proven, and this is referenceable information.
Well, again, we're back to the question how it's proven
about how phased array transmitters work, scalar technology. I mean, I've read shitloads of books that make this common knowledge to people that want to do the research.
Okay, I mean that's fair enough.
And I don't come with a bibliography. I guess I've done more research.
But if you've researched, talk to me about that.
It just sounds interesting to me that you're saying that you're a student of this same stuff and know nothing about it.
I mean, there are.
You said you've studied electromagnetic frequency things. Have you read any books about Tesla?
I might need some brushing up on that, and I appreciate.
Yeah, it sounds like you might need a lot of brushing up on that because how can you talk to me about electricity when you aren't versed in Nikola Tesla?
Well, I'm asking you to educate us. That's what I've been.
Well, then I'm going to have to tell you that you're going to have to spend 30 years of research to understand what I'm up to.
Okay, I mean that's fair.
I cannot simply. I mean, basically, I got on the internet under the call sign, basically, of deciphering my experience because I knew even myself it was a hard time connecting all the dots to express exactly what's going on, which is why I pretty much instantaneously boiled it down to, well, what do people really need to know? Because I don't feel like writing a book about me because I'm the least important part of this equation, but there's a brand new weapon that's pointed at every single person's face on this planet, and I need to inform them as fast as possible. Oh, no, look. Everybody wants to talk about how the gun is built. What a waste of my freaking time and effort.
Okay. I don't want to know how the gun is built. I understand how the gun is built. I have a general understanding of an energy weapon that has an electrical potential to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just part and parcel of people's curiosity around once we understand what the DOMs are.
And feds or feds of other nations come through this line of questioning because they're looking for intel to find out, who leaked what to me, what got leaked in the greatest specificity possible. And it just seems to be another one of those conversations where they're going to avoid the information that I put out and try to track down root cause analysis type stuff. Who did Hecker hear this from? What exactly does he know? I mean, I've put forth what I know. It's open for conversation anytime anybody wants to engage it. There's a directed energy weapon system at South Pole Station. There's actually 3 of them.
So you've
the
spoken about
Ice-Cube Neutrino Detector is one of them. The ELF system is another one. And then what appears to be some sort of a chemical laser is the third one.
Okay, I have not heard of these last 2.
Then again, you're very limited on your folder for me.
Mm-hmm. So can you share a little bit on these other two directed energy weapons? Where were these documented? What types of weaponry are they? If you can give me a sense on what they might
These
do.
are systems that I observe with my own eyes and hands. So it's direct firsthand experience, which you seem to think very little of.
It's quite the opposite. I'm not sure exactly why you continue to denigrate this effort to just gain some knowledge and information. One, just so you know, about 10 years ago, I ran for governor in the state of Wisconsin as a libertarian. I'm not with the feds. I'm not here to hide the feds. I'm not representing the feds. My goal in life is to end the federal government and the entire governance of the entire world to begin with, because we have weapons that do all sorts of terrible, rotten things to people. And I'm trying to figure it out for people.
I think it was Chris Rock who did a comedian stand-up special one time, where he basically did this whole spiel. Actually, it might have been Dave Chappelle, where he did this whole spiel about how he was dressed up like a cop, and that somebody came running up to him, and he was bouncing off, a girl saying, "Oh, how dare you talk to me like that? Just because I'm dressed like this, you think I'm a hooker?" And he, well, if you dress like a hoe, you get treated like a hoe. And then he was saying something to the effect of, if he went out and got dressed up like a cop, if someone came running up to him and said, "Hey, can I have some help?" "Oh, just because I look like a police officer right now." So I'm just going to go with, I can appreciate you saying that, you're with the Libertarian Party. You couldn't possibly be affiliated with the feds in any way, shape, or form. But you're asking the same questions.
Yeah, I'm just looking for information. They might be good questions.
Which is like what feds do, right? I'm just looking for information.
I think that's what interviewers do too. It's just the nature of an interview.
No, not necessarily at all.
Interviewers in a podcast don't ask questions.
A lot of interviewers function the way that you do. A lot of them do not. I've done a lot more than 50 interviews right now. I'm becoming very versed in how this stuff goes. So again, I'm just going to go off my experiences with having been interviewed many times. Your line of questioning does not come from a side that normally presents as somebody who actively supports the information that I've put out and what I'm attempting to do with it.
Eric, honestly, I can't tell you why you feel that way, but I can tell
previous
you that
experience.
You completely missed the point. And not of you.
I think you're completely missing the point. I think you're missing the point, sir.
You've made such an incredible claim. It strains credulity.
Well, the entire time we've been talking, you've done due diligence to make sure to not engage the information that I've presented and to ask questions from a seemingly noble direction of just trying to find out more.
That's what I thought I was doing, Eric. I've made an effort to try and probe what the machine is, where we can aim it, how we might be able to aim it, who the targets might be. We've talked about
every time I present the information in that regard,
how you might have been engaged in this for multiple decades, whether you knew it or not. Right. These are all just questions around creating a playing field for people to understand. Again, I think that
it doesn't. So it's normally in that line of questioning that you just had, since you did so well with following it up with so that people can understand. That seems to be the part that is absent in this dialogue, is that other people, when they ask me those questions that you're asking, and I answer them, they engage them as if they just learned something, and then they move forwards with consideration of what that new information means, and they do all of that before getting to the next question, which is less of an understanding of the presented answer previously and more of a direction of now trying to add further proof to the answer that was just previously queried about. That's the activity that we're in.
All right. Well, very good. Well, listen, Eric, I think we've had a great conversation here. We've gotten a lot of things out. I had questions. I've gotten most of my questions asked, and headed up towards, what I think are just some really big issues that we face. And so I'll close this out. Do you have any last thoughts or any last thoughts you'd like to give to the audience here before we share it out?
I find it wild that you're closing up shop after that last statement.
Well, Eric, we're not making any more progress here. You've told me that I'm a Fed. You can't tell me how the DOMs work. You're certain that they're directed at everybody without being able to tell me how. And whilst I believe that you are telling the truth about the directed energy weapon, I don't know why I can't get any more detail out of you. And it's at this point, I don't want to have the audience.
Your summary is indicative of the angle that you've been operating from the entire time. It is not from somebody who understands and supports. It is a discounting inquisition.
Okay. Everybody on my channel, I think Eric is telling the truth about the directed energy weapon. I believe that the DOMs generate 2047 volts. My supposition is that they're going to fire up. That's where I think they go. I don't have to have that be right. I've looked for more information from Eric to tell me how else might this work. I've gotten scalar waves. I've gotten electromagnetism, and I've been told that I'm of low intellect. Omnidirectional. And
so I've pretty much answered all of your questions.
Well, omnidirectional doesn't explain how. It's just omnidirectional. It's not, it doesn't explain what that directionality is, how that directionality is focused. It doesn't tell us what mechanism it is utilizing.
So you want a part number? You want a part number for everything on the circuit board?
No, but for most people.
So where does the line end in the inquiry? What if I just simply said it becomes it's a program for how the DOMs are coordinated and fired, since it's a 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer 3-dimensional antenna? I mean, I would think you would just know that from the information that I've given you already, since you're a student in these things. How do you not know how a phased array transmitter triangulates its function for direction?
Well, when
you really need,
it's the bottom of the earth,
it's a program. There's a bunch of DOMs. There's a bunch of DOMs that are a phased array, and you triangulate the target by which ones you fire off in the line that you want.
Are we firing through the middle of the earth, or are we firing up into the ionosphere?
Again, it has
nothing
to do with. I've given you the answer. It's not any of that.
So it doesn't fire up and it doesn't fire down.
It fires from point A to point B.
Are you talking as a transmedium type of weapon? There's nothing between it. It fires in the South Pole and it appears in Stalingrad.
That's what I've been saying.
And there's no point of supposition between the two.
That's what I've been saying.
Okay. All right.
So this is where I get it. I'm giving you the information, and you're saying that I'm not answering the question. It's really, it appears my answer is just going over your head. Maybe that's why you're not engaging them.
Well, again, if it's going over my head, it's probably going over most of the listeners to every podcast that you've been on.
That seems to be very obvious.
Eric, I'm trying to help you out here by asking the questions other people haven't asked.
People have asked these questions, sir. You're asking me the same thing. I'm giving you the same answers I've given to other people.
I don't know why I've had to drag it so hard.
Because
I'm looking for definitions of how the weapon might target. Because if the idea is that it's targeted at everyone,
this is totally ridiculous. Because again, this is me presenting to you. There's a gun pointed at your head, and you're like, "What kind of scope does he have?"
Well, if you're using if you're using scalar waves don't start here and transmit over there. Scalar waves are a wave of energy, and so there has to be a line of sight if you're using a wave of energy.
No, there doesn't, sir. You have a very limited understanding of longitudinal and scalar waves. You're trying to say this again?
Enlighten us. How would those be utilized And how is it that they don't have to have a line of sight?
Because they don't have to, sir. What do you mean a line of sight? You mean an area that's been impacted from point A to point B?
Well, I mean, if you're going to release an earthquake at point B, and you're saying that part of that is done with scalar waves, how did the scalar waves get there?
By a scalar transmitter.
Okay. So transmitting between A and B?
Yes.
Okay, there we go. Transmitting between A and B. That's a big start. That's a big start. So,
I've said this earlier in the conversation.
Well, but the question is, when you transmit that scalar wave, right? How
causes an earthquake?
Yes. How is that scalar wave originating and manifesting from that transmission?
That's the job of the scalar transmitter. Again, this is like, you're like, well, when the bullet hits me in the forehead, because you told me somebody's got a barrel to my temple, what kind of spring tension is there on that trigger? How long has he got to pull on that trigger before I get really terrified?
You know, I understand that. I get the point that you're making, but again, it's back to the same, basic idea. You've seen the documentation. You can keep
asking me this stuff, but I'm going to pretty much just keep doubling down on this. Seems to be a ridiculous waste of effort to be asking again. What kind of scope is on the gun that's pointed on my head? What's the spring tension on the gun? It seems like a really weird way.
Without being able to identify.
I've already proven. I haven't said, sir. I've proven. And the fact that you keep not saying that is indicative of you being less than genuine in your statement that you believe I found a directed energy weapon system. You keep making it like I have to keep proving it, even to you.
No,
I've already proven it. There is a directed energy weapon system down at the South Pole Station. I provided the documentation to both the Senate Intelligence Committee and Arrow. It's not up for debate.
I'm not debating it. I agree.
Okay, so there's a directed energy weapon system there that I can't really tell you about what lenses are on the scope. I can't really tell you the spring tension on the trigger. I can't tell you how many rounds are in the magazine, but none of that really matters because of what I have said is pertinent, actionable intelligence that we should be discussing in greater depth instead of trying to ask more questions as if something still needs to be proven before further discussion can go on.
Well, I think the question I'm asking and what I'm asking you to prove is that this weapon has global launchability. Because whilst I agree with you that the Christchurch earthquakes were part of the machines coming online, I'm trying to understand what else, how else this might work or where else this might have been delivered. Because the only thing I can identify right now is that there is an electric system at the South Pole Station that I firmly believe is a directed energy weapon. I've asked you, how do you know it's being targeted? How do you know who it's being targeted at? How do you know the intention of the people who are in control of the machine? And all of these
the answer is
from supposition.
We don't. No, the answer is we don't, which is why I'm bringing this information public so that we can. That's the whole point of what I'm doing.
Yes, I'm agreeing with you on that.
First, you have to admit there's a problem, right? This is like the 12-step program. We're at step 1. I need to first and foremost, before anybody continues to step 2, you have to admit there's a fucking problem.
There's a directed energy weapon in South America, in South Pole. Eric, I'm agreeing with you.
Okay. Then
I'm asking questions about.
So then, why are you asking questions? Then why don't we just engage with the knowns?
So if one of the knowns is directing this at, and how would you let someone know that you have this? Right. So I mean, did Biden call up and say, "Hey, I've got a directed energy weapon"?
How about this? Humor me. instead of coming up with questions right now, I can appreciate that you're finding yourself to be some sort of a reporter who's required to ask questions. Let's turn the table for a minute. You're not a reporter. We're two guys in a bar. I'm asking you to not throw questions at me. I'm asking for your considerations with the information that I've just shared with you.
Fair enough.
That's where we're at. So I have proven that there's a directed energy weapon system at the South Pole Station for which you agree.
Yes.
This exists. So I'm simply trying to engage your intellect, sir, on what you consider this means to all of the people on the planet, since anyone who's done the lightest of research into directed energy weapon systems, scalar and longitudinal wave platforms, does realize that the extent of which this weapon can reach is everywhere on the planet and then some. So again, the ball is in your court. What are your considerations when hearing this stuff?
My considerations are, if it can discharge anywhere on the earth, that it has the potential to be almost a terroristic weapon. It has the ability to change economic situations for large groups of individuals, which can be substantially disruptive to regimes. I believe that there are opportunities to even, potentially hold countries at bay, right? I mean, you want to look, you can look at this, you can go, hey, Russia or China, if you want to invade Taiwan, we're going to put an earthquake at your port as you launch it. So don't even try it. But again, my point here, Eric, is, are there weapons at the South Pole Station? Because if we make one single threat,
I'm sorry, did you say are there?
If there are
There's no if.
defensive weapons around the South Pole Station, right? I'm just.
Are you talking about conventional weapons?
Well, look, it could be any type of weapon, but the idea is that if there are weapons in the South Pole, they would be there to protect this directed energy weapon. I don't think anybody thinks it's unreasonable to ask, did you see any sort of military presence or installation on the site? Because as soon as you use it once,
we had military presence on the site. I mean, this is all it's every single year the military runs the logistics in and out.
What sort of military presence did you see?
Tons of Air Force.
Well, tons is a large number, and it comes by the thousands. So you saw thousands of people from the Air Force.
No, I didn't see thousands.
Okay, so it's not tons.
I guess I was including equipment.
Okay. So what type of equipment was there that would make you think that there would be defenses for this directed energy weapon?
I didn't say that there was Air Force. You're doing a lot of I've made no such statement.
Saying that we have a weapon that they're going to use to threaten countries and people around the world.
No, I'm not saying I've proven.
Well, you've proven there's a directed energy weapon. You're trying to ferret out whether or not that weapon is going to be used against humanity, or in my opinion, against the pyramid in Alaska. I'm exploring the humanity question. I don't have any reason to say that is not part of it just yet. But in order for me to understand how it might be, I understand how
you seem to be doing due diligence to ignore the information being presented to you. It's a man-made weapon. It's a man-made weapon currently being utilized against mankind, not for anything that you've speculated.
But how do you know?
Because it's called Dazin. It's called Dazin. I'm going to go back to what Heidegger's reference was about the value of first-hand experience, and you simply lack it.
That's fine. That's fine.
I work there. I intermingle with these people. I provided the documentation that
I'm still asking that hard question, though, Eric.
That substantiates what I'm saying is true, and you've done nothing on your part to do anything but speculate with unsubstantiated claims.
Well, again, I understand.
It's a weapon made by men that's currently attacking men.
Well,
and some men are aware, and some men aren't.
I've asked you several times to tell me what men we've attacked, and to define for me.
We had a friendly fire incident twice with New Zealand, the city of Christchurch. How it works: Was the Ice-Cube Neutrino Detector misfired and hit them twice before they made a correction?
And how do you know they made a correction? Did you see documentation that there was a correction? Did you see documentation about a realigning of the DOMs?
My direct firsthand experience is sufficient in answer. You seem to be digging for greater specificity than is required.
I don't think anybody would disagree that it's a very reasonable thing to ask. How do you know?
I would disagree. Other people in the intelligence communities who I have worked with for now 4 years would say, "Wow, look at this guy was trying to get your sources." All I'm doing is
I know people who know how this is targeted.
And then when I say that, you ask for more. I mean, I pretty much said that throughout this conversation.
No, you said that you've read and you understand because you have.
And I've said that I've spoken, and I've said I've spoken with these people before and after.
Okay.
So you're not doing well with following along the answers to your own questions. I've answered that question for you previously in this conversation.
Okay. And that's just sort of where we are at this point, is if I can't generate more specific information about who has a finger and how they're targeting it, then we know there's a weapon there. The question is who's the weapon against?
Everyone. I've already answered that, but you have your doubts because you
have
want
my doubts.
further you're right. So you don't believe people with direct first-hand experience that can document that there's a weapons platform there. So, you're doing a better job at trying to paint me in a negative light than a positive one, which would be, it's your choice to do either, sir.
I think you might be overstating that, Eric, but
I don't think so in the slightest.
What I'm hoping to do is I'm hoping to understand and differentiate between your discovery of a directed energy weapon and your supposition of how it's being used and where it's being used. And
I don't think it was a supposition at all. There was an email that was released from the desk of Hillary Clinton. This is information that I've put out publicly before also. I'm not the greatest archivist in the world, but this is information I put out before. This was an email right after the Christchurch earthquake event where Hillary Clinton, I'm paraphrasing, basically said well, that happened right on cue.
Well, again, like I said, if you're coming online with the array, the two junctions of the delta Y would both become electrified at that moment. And it very well, because there would be a change. Earthquakes are a change in the electrical potential between two plates. When there's more electrical potential in one plate than the other, you'll have an immediate thunderstorm-like clap as they equalize with each other. And if the point of the station is to connect to the delta Y or to the Earth's electromagnetic field, Christchurch is directly in line to an electrical circuit. I can explain why it would be there, and I can give you a fair level.
But it's not. You said if it's intended to do that, and it's not.
Well, it's intended to be electric. That's the only statement I've gotten from you. It's got 2,040 volts with 5,000 and some DOMs. So we've got a lot of electricity. That's what we know for sure. Mm-hmm. I agree with that statement wholeheartedly.
Are you familiar with Tesla coils?
Share with us how a Tesla coil might work here and what it might be doing.
How about answer my question? Holy shit!
I'm familiar.
Are you familiar?
I am superficially familiar with Tesla coils. I understand what they are. I've seen them in action. I couldn't necessarily tell you exactly how they operate. These are the things I'm asking you to share with people, Eric.
If you got
Tesla coil working,
so Tesla coils. How long do you think Tesla coils have been on this planet?
Well, I can show you examples of natural Tesla coils that occurred during the Venus apocalypse, but those are separated and they aren't currently.
I'm talking about Tesla coils of Nikola Tesla design, sir.
Well, I mean, he started his back in the 1915, 18, 20, something like that. So they've been around for about 100 years, as far as I know.
At least, right?
Right.
So with that being said, that means that this information has been available to everybody since he released it.
Fair enough.
How does a Tesla coil move the electricity from point A to point B? There's a Tesla transmitter and there's a Tesla receiver. They're pretty much identical circuits made in reverse. They're referred to as air resonant transformers. It's a transformer. You know what it's transforming?
What is it transforming?
So your answer is no. You don't know what it's transforming?
Well, I share with everybody. I mean, it's electricity. It's turning voltage into charge. It's displaying a discharge. What is it transforming?
Hertzian to scalar.
Hertzian to scale. So we're moving from the hertz into a scalar wave itself.
Correct.
So it's
you know what the receiver does?
What does the receiver do?
Transforms from scalar back to Hertzian.
Okay, and so are you saying that that's how
on.
the weapon is going? Are you saying that that's how the weapon's working? It starts as a hertz.
I'm saying it is literally the simplest, one of the simplest circuits that can ever be observed. It's been available for over 100 years. Anyone can build one of these.
Can they build a receiver?
An air resonant transformer set would be a transmitter and a receiver. If you can build a transmitter, you can build a receiver because they're fucking identical, except for the power supply and the outlet. If you wanted to do it from your wall outlet, you'd have a Tesla transformer transmitter you'd plug into the wall. And the other one wouldn't have the male plug, it would have a female receptacle. And if you build your air resonant transformers correctly, you too can transmit in the scalar longitudinal wavelength.
Okay. Do I need a receiver to receive that?
Yeah, that's what I just said.
Okay, so if I have a directed energy weapon using scalar waves, what am I dropping in a receiver where I want to drop the earthquake?
Oh, that would be one way to do it. But now, if you're trying to do one to the other, you just leapt from a discussion on Tesla coils to a discussion on directed energy weapons, and I do not want to presuppose for the audience that such a leap is of value.
Okay.
So if you want to change the subject, that would be different. But as far as the air resonant transformer set goes, in that design, the transmitter and the receiver are required for the operation.
Okay. All right.
That was stuff we figured out over 100 years ago. Now, if you want to talk about modern day directed energy weapons, let me tell you about the wonderful thing known as not needing a receiver.
Okay. How would that work?
The scalar is delivered without the need for a receiver.
Okay.
That's how it would work. This is not, I mean, these aren't really leaps of understanding if you have any understanding at all. But it seems like if you want to have not understanding, it seems like that's the direction of inquiry, is that you're just pretending to know stuff about stuff, but then having questions that don't seem to match what should be your understanding of stuff.
Well, that's problematic, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, sure is.
Okay. There we go. All right. So, Eric, I'm going to swing back to this. I'm going to wrap this up here for us. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience? I have enjoyed our time, and I do hope that you understand I am just trying to ferret questions that come across so that people who have questions like me, can get some of these perspectives. And if you believe that understanding Hertzian to scalar waves is important, then that will be on my list of things that I need to look up and relate so that I can understand better how this might be used in a more general sense. But there's a lot to be understood here. There's a lot to be considered, and there's a lot of information that, in my opinion, we don't know, and there's a lot of information that we do know. And I'm just working towards finding the best set of information for people who want to understand this crazy world that we live in.
I guess just jump right in and do a whole bunch of research on directed energy weapons then, because you're going to have a lot of fun getting the education of a lifetime.
All right. Very good. Eric, thanks you much. Thank you very much for coming on to this Dr. Stinky McDougall podcast. I do appreciate you very much. And if you have any follow-up information or anything you'd like to share with me, feel free to send it on over and I'll include it in the video. And with that, thank you very much once again, and peace. Thank you.
Have a good one.